Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm checking to make sure we have all of our folks here to share with you. It looks like we do. My name is Melanie Stambaugh with the Northwest Seaport Alliance. I do want to let all attendees know that today's media availability will be recorded, so please take note of that. At this time, I know we're in a condensed time frame, so we want to pass it off. First, let me introduce who we have. We have with us our Northwest Seaport Alliance co-chairs, Commissioner Dick Marzano, President of the Port of Tacoma Commission, and Commissioner Fred Felleman, President of the Port of Seattle Commission. We also have with us the United States Coast Guard, Captain Patrick Hilbert, as well as the Pacific Merchant Shipping Association's Captain Mike Moore. To begin, I will kick it over to Commissioner Marzano to start today's media availability. Commissioner?
Well, thank you, and I'll be very brief. As all of you are aware of, we're experiencing unprecedented pressure at several points in the supply chain. Marine terminals, rail capacity, warehouse capacity, and trucking shortage, just to name a few. And needless to say, the pandemic has caused a short-term stoppage of manufacturing in Asia. They would start, they would stop, start and stop. Well, they're moving now, but the rebound of manufacturing was met with huge demand of import goods. Customer spending has increased, and the supply chain has just not been able to keep up. But the Northwest Seaport Alliance, we're working closely with our importers and exports to help with the movement of cargo and keep our operations going. And it's not going to end overnight, but we're going to keep moving forward. So with that, I'll turn over to my co-chair, Fred Felleman.
Well, thank you, Dick, and welcome everybody for joining us. We just had a budget briefing earlier today for the Alliance, and there's a lot of material on the website if you want to get some trend data and things like that. But one of the things that's very interesting to note is that we're basically back to 2019 numbers, but we are backed up like this because this volume came in such a quick period of time. So overall, the number of containers being handled isn't much different, but it's this Christmas rush, shall we say, which may actually increase things even further. So that's just a kind of an interesting perspective on the inability of the supply chain. It's not to handle the total volume, but it's the rate at which it's coming in. Anyway, so the Seaport Alliance is doing a lot of things, working with the industry to try to alleviate this congested moment that hopefully won't last too much longer. But like I said, there's still traffic to come. But this is also including things that we have some control over, trying to work directly with the rail lines and customers to try to alleviate some of the bottlenecks. And one of the direct things that we have is this spare container terminal space at Terminal 5 and at Terminal 46, where you see us just staging empty boxes or filled boxes, but not operating with cranes on and off the terminal. We're trucking them to the sites. This opens up space on Terminal 18 primarily and 30 to be able to load and unload containers to keep the volume going. We will have in January Terminal 5 operational, at least Phase 1, which will certainly be able to take on a lot more of the volume, but certainly this is a bigger thing than just one terminal can handle. And then finally, with concerns about actually ships at anchor and the fewer anchorages available as the weather deteriorates, the Port and the Seaport Alliance have made Terminal 46 available for ships to moor at to get out of the weather and not be just wandering off or loitering off the coast or doing racetracks in the Strait of Juan de Fuca, which you'll hear more about from the Coast Guard. But with that, I would like to pass it on to Captain Hilbert and to tell us about the operational situation. We are finding containers now showing up on the west side of Vancouver Island associated with the Zim accident, but he will have the up-to-date information.
Oh, well, thank you, Commissioner Felleman. Good morning, or good afternoon. My name is Captain Patrick Hilbert. I'm the commander for United States Coast Guard Sector Puget Sound, which area of responsibility is the greater Puget Sound area from the Canadian, border down to just north of Grays Harbor. And as one of my responsibilities here in the Greater Puget Sound is serving as the captain of the port. And through those authorities here, I am responsible on behalf of the American people for helping preserve and protect the maritime transportation system, which is what we're talking about here this afternoon. I'm fortunate enough here at Sector Puget Sound to have a vessel traffic center here down in the Terminal 46, just south of Terminal 40, Pier 36, just south of the Terminal 46 that Commissioner Fellman mentioned earlier. I have 50 women and men, both civilian and military members that serve in the vessel traffic center and help keep maritime shipping safe, secure, and environmentally responsible. As you've already heard, there is a significant increase, not necessarily in traffic, but use of anchorages here in the Greater Puget Sound throughout the Sound and the Salish Sea. We have a mixture of just over 40 federal and non-federal anchorages that have seen increased use really over the last 12 months as we have seen the global supply chain and return and shipping returning to the West Coast. And so as part of that, the Vessels Traffic Center of those anchorages have been deemed appropriate for the larger container ships that are calling on some of these anchorages here in the Puget Sound area. And that number is right around 12. And really, to have a viable, safe, effective maritime transportation system, anchorages are a key part of that. And we've been working with our port partners there at the Northwest Seaport Alliance, the Port of Seattle, Port of Tacoma, the vessel carriers, and then our Puget Sound pilots on ensuring that these ships move safely to anchorages. And we're also working for ways to mitigate the use of those anchorages so they're available in times of heavy weather and available like we had last weekend here in the Greater Puget Sound. So that's my update for that for right now, and I look forward to questions later on during the media session. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Captain Hilbert. Now I will pass it over to Captain Mike Moore with the Pacific Merchant Shipping Association. Mike?
Well, thank you. Just for everybody on the line that's not familiar with our association, our members include the ocean carriers calling on the West Coast and the container terminal operators, in addition to other service providers. So clearly we're working on this issue quite a bit down in LA Long Beach. Right now, today they have 77 container vessels at anchor or in holding areas. Here, as Captain Hilbert mentioned, there's an order to what happens here. Vessels have to tell the Coast Guard when they're coming in 4 days ahead of time. They used to enter a queue for the terminal at the pilot station at Port Angeles. And then if there was the berth slot was not available, then they would head on to an anchorage spot. And as he mentioned, there's limited anchorage spots. And Melanie, if you want to throw that chart up on the screen there, that would be good right now. Our area, our waterway is very, very big. The Strait of Juan de Fuca alone is 1,000 square miles of navigable waterway. However, it's very deep, which is great. It's protected, it's deep, it helps us be safe. But that also means we have limited anchor spots, as Captain Hilbert said, especially for large, very long, high sail area, sticking above the water container ships. And so they do a great job managing. You can see that picture there. Think of 1,000 square miles just in the Strait of Juan de Fuca there as you enter from sea. And then you can see those red dots are some of the anchor spots that have been used. The one in Bellingham, I believe the Coast Guard finally said, now we're getting into high wind season, late fall and winter. Those are not appropriate for container vessels. We had 14 vessels at container at one point, and as Captain Hilbert said, it's down to 12 spots available. Because of that situation, we worked with our folks to push the queue out. What I mean by that is, instead of coming over here at whatever sea speed they're selecting, let's say from China, and arriving at Port Angeles and entering the queue and then going to anchor and waiting 5 days, 7 days, 10 days, maybe even some up to 2 weeks. We thought it was smarter that if we could get the information to the ocean carriers way early in the process, 3 to 4 weeks is what we're doing right now. If you get that information over to them, they can make different choices about their voyage planning. What that means is they could either choose to, say, anchor in China before departure, or they could slow steam. And of course, as we get into fall and winter months, you have these low pressure systems, these pretty big storms in the Aleutians. We had one off of Vancouver Island, one up in the Aleutians, and one in mid-Pacific here in the last 5-6 days. They know that. They need to weather route around that for safety. Before that, they were coming over, arriving a bit early and staying well offshore, sometimes 1,000 miles offshore, and others are in the 200-mile offshore, and then they'd come in a little bit closer. They got closer to their berth slot. And as a result, we were able to reduce the number of container vessels that anchor from 14 down to 1. But predictably and properly, the anchorages started being used more as these storms approached. And vessels found it safer to either come in and do racetracks, as Commissioner Fellman said, in the Strait of Juan de Fuca, with the permission and under the monitoring of the Cooperative Vessel Traffic Service between Canada and the United States there in our bilateral waters, and allow them to come in and out inbound lane and turn around and go an outbound lane. And that was a safer condition for them than staying out at sea drifting or slow steaming in the storms. That also meant that some of the anchorages started being used again. However, I think today, the worst of that's passed. Of course, the sea conditions are still pretty significant. We only have 3 container vessels that anchor today. The whole point was to take pressure off the anchorages, but to do so in a safe fashion. It's always good when you can have more information to plan your voyage, and all this did was give them information 3 to 4 weeks out about their likely berth slot. Then it's up to every individual master and ocean carrier to manage their voyage safely with their weather routing programs and software and analysis. So that's what's being done on the vessel side. The reason it's backed up, of course, you've heard different bits and pieces of that today, but the reason that's backed up, of course, the supply chain has many players, and you can look at where the choke points are, but choke points on land end up backing up into the terminal. Yesterday, I checked with Terminal 18, and they had 7,000 loaded import containers waiting to be picked up, and we're not seeing the trucks pick them up at a very fast pace. In fact, the utilization rate at the gates is about 35% less than what it should be. That means the trucks are not showing up and picking up the cargo. And if they don't pick up the cargo, then the ships can't come in and get worked at a good rate, at a high utilization rate, which is what the terminal wants to do. It's what the ocean carriers want to do. A lot of folks are talking about incentives and different changes in the supply chain to try and improve the flow of cargo and the velocity of cargo. But at least for the folks I represent, the ocean carriers, they have all the incentive in the world to not sit there. They design, build, and operate their ships to move cargo, not to sit off of LA Long Beach or to sit at Anchorage here. So they got strong incentive to get into the terminal. They do not want to get bumped out of their slot. They fight very hard for their slot, and they want to keep it. And they want to get their cargo offloaded and load what they're going to load on export and empty side. Same as them is the terminal operators who want to move cargo. They're paid and they operate to move cargo, and they want a high utilization rate for their terminal and their gates. That's not what we're seeing right now because things are jammed up back at the terminal. And we can have all sorts of discussions about all the players and all the entities and all the touch points in the supply chain, from trucks and warehouses and truck drivers and chassis and distribution centers and transloading facilities and delivery services, terminal ships, the whole bit. It all has to work in sync, or choke points develop, and those choke points back up everything else upstream. So that's what's happening. I would say that there are some things that have been done. I think Commissioner Fellman mentioned it. Empties were being stored off terminal, so that would free up chassis and space to allow the terminal to breathe a little bit, move some cargo off. The vessel queuing, of course. And then the terminal gate hours. A lot has been written when the Biden administration came out and talked about 24/7 in LA. I would just like to clarify that really can't happen. It wasn't happening because the rest of the supply chain wasn't able to operate at 24/7. It's a great notion. It's been talked about for years and years and years, but the whole supply chain has to be able to operate. You have to have somewhere to take the cargo. And so that's a sort of an aspirational discussion. It's not reality at this point. If you looked at gate cameras either here or down in LA Long Beach at 9:30 in the morning, you would see a lot of empty gates. In other words, no trucks showing up to pick up the cargo. So we got to get at that congestion point and get the cargo moved off the terminals to allow the system on the water side to breathe. I think that probably gives you all an overview. We can all take questions at this point.
Excellent, thank you all. Also available for questions is John Wolf, CEO of the Northwest Seaport Alliance, as well as one of our operations members, Zach Thomas. So at this time, those media folks, feel free to type in the chat if you have a question, or you can take yourself off mute and ask any question that you may have.
Hey, let me start here. This is Glenn Farley with King TV. We learned yesterday that I guess 100 containers actually came off the Zim Kingston instead of 40. What's being done to track those, and what kind of marine hazard is that presenting?
Hey, this is Captain Patrick Hilbert with the U.S. Coast Guard. Coast Guard District 13 has been communicating with the Canadian government on the response to the Zim Kingston. We also learned yesterday that that initial estimate of 40 containers was higher over the range of around 100. Those containers, departed, left the vessel, we believe, while they were offshore, end of last week, and modeling confirmed by both the Canadian side and here by NOAA shows that those containers, if they were still afloat, were drifting, well to the north, staying offshore of the Vancouver Island. And as my last update on that last night here at Sector Puget Sound level was that none of those containers had been located, at this time. But I did hear Commissioner Feldman mention that maybe some made landfall on the western part of Vancouver Island.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the Marine Maritime Executive last night that said that 3 boxes landed on the Cape Scott Provincial Park, remote wilderness area. That's at the northwestern tip of Vancouver Island. And Czech News reported that additional debris had also been found there. But the weather is really miserable, so getting birds up in the air and things like that is challenging at this point in time. But I believe 2 of those containers were supposed to have some of the same hazardous materials, mining materials, and the number they report is 109 specifically total.
Hello, Captain Hilbert. It's Graham Johnson from Cairo. I was wondering if you could just run down, remind us on exactly how many vessels you do have, container vessels at anchor in Puget Sound. I think I heard 3 at the moment. And also, if you could just explain again with the weather situation, how many anchorages you had, say, this summer that you've now lost, and which ones because of the season. And that I assume it's because of the southern exposure. Is that correct?
Yeah, so a couple of questions there. The number of vessels at anchor is rather dynamic in any given time. The number 3 sounds about right for this moment in time here at anchor. We also have additional vessels in the Strait of Juan de Fuca, heard the term, doing racetracks. So those are vessels that are relatively protected waters within the cooperative vessel traffic service zone on both the U.S. and Canadian side that are heading eastbound, then turning back to the north and westbound out of the strait, and then to effectively just doing a big oval, either waiting for an anchorage or the opportunity to head directly to berth, which is the desire of the shipper and the terminals. Regarding anchorages, I mentioned earlier this summer, we had 14 available anchorages stretching from Bellingham, Holmes Harbor, Yukon, down into Commencement Bay and here in the Elliott Bay area. With the increased likelihood for adverse weather and the southern exposure up in Bellingham, those using my captain of the port order, consistent with Puget Sound state pilots, that at this time made a decision not to allow the larger container vessels to anchor up in Bellingham Bay.
If I could also hop in on that just a little bit, it is not desirable to take that transit to Bellingham or Holmes Harbor or any remote anchorage. You're burning fuel, emissions, the whole bit. You gotta pay extra pilot fees to do all that. That is not a desire by the vessels either. I think when Bellingham was used, it's really because Coast Guard VTS is really managing anchorages very well, and it just happened to be that the other anchorages were full at that time, and now it makes sense not to use them. But the vessels don't want to be doing that. They would rather come right into the dock ideally. If they come in for a short stay at anchor, they'd rather stay closer to the dock they're going to call on. And that's what we're kind of working on, to try and maximize that and minimize the stacking up for days and weeks. And on a side note, we're doing the same thing. We just launched a queuing change proposal down in LA Long Beach to have those vessels spread out and slow steaming safely on their voyages as well. Take pressure off down there, same kind of thing.
Hi there, Tracy Record from West Seattle Blog. Question about, you mentioned Los Angeles, Long Beach. Has there been any sort of redirecting since, gosh, 77 vessels backed up down there sounds incredible compared to over here, or does that even work that way at all?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. I was down there when we started the Vessel Traffic Service in '94, and we established some order around all the anchorages there. So they have quite a few anchorages outside that breakwater, but at some point you run out of appropriate depth water, and we get into what we call drift boxes, staging areas, where the vessels assign like a 2-mile area to stay within, but they're not anchored. We also had contingency anchorages down off the Huntington Beach area there that kind of added to the normal anchorages that were used. So what we're looking at now is spreading out those anchorages. Well, they're already designated, but spreading out vessels, even more sea room in between vessels at anchor, and going to spread this out through the whole transit. So to your point, it is not a great situation to have that many vessels out there. Yes, they're staying away from each other. Yes, they're operational. Yes, if you're at anchor, you got a second anchor and so on. But they want to take that volume down quite a bit, and we think we're going to be able to spread it out even to the point of maybe some vessels anchoring in Asia before they depart if they know they're going to sit there for 10 days. And then others are slow steaming, which saves them fuel at sea and so forth, but they have to do that in a safe manner, meaning weather routing and speed and so forth that have to be decided based on the conditions.
But you can't say, for example, oh, well, they're just way too backed up in Southern California, so why don't you go offload in Seattle instead?
So I would just, and Zach's on here too, there's a lot of moving parts when you're having a vessel that was destined, say, for Vancouver, and all of a sudden you're going to skip Vancouver, or you're going to go somewhere else. It's loaded with containers going either points east or to local consumption, what have you. But, there's a lot of things that have been done, like Oakland really was backed up with 28 vessels, and some of those ships actually just skipped Oakland and went to LA, but then you have to put trucks on the road to get it back up there. So anytime you change a situation outside the plan, you have some ramifications. So it's not as easy as like, hey, take 20 of those vessels and move them somewhere else. But some of that has been happening. We skip certain calls. Ships are skipping certain calls, or they add in certain calls to try and get their cargo moved. So I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it's not like you can take 77 vessels in LA and just say 37 of them take off and go somewhere else. Right now, it's not quite that easy.
Thank you.
But the intact intermodal cargo that would be heading to the middle of the country, some of that can divert through the Panama Canal and enter on the East Coast and come at it from the other direction.
Yeah, and that's why Savannah has 22 vessels at anchor. So you're just moving the problem around. We got to get the stuff. Honestly, we got to get the stuff into the hands of the people purchasing it. It's got to get through the system and get to them to take pressure off the system. We just got to get there. I don't know if inflation is going to reduce demand over time here in a little bit and start giving a little breathing room there or not. We'll see what happens. But right now, you can shift around to Savannah. You can shift all over the place. Oakland right now is going from 28 vessels in queue down to 0. And now they're saying, hey, okay, you made some adjustments. Now we're down to 0. You can still come back here. So they just made that announcement last week as well.
Hi, John Ryan from KUOW Radio. I've heard that some captains prefer to wait offshore rather than coming into an anchorage, and I wonder if the captain of the Zim Kingston had requested to have anchorage space or to come into the racetrack, or is that a choice that the captain made himself to stay offshore despite rough conditions?
Hey, good afternoon. This is Captain Patrick Gilbert with the U.S. Coast Guard. So that vessel was destined to the Port of Vancouver up in British Columbia. And so I don't have that information related to what the master's decision was as far as staying offshore, vice heading in, or potentially also Canada in the Port of Vancouver manages anchorages in Canadian waters. So I don't have the details on that particular vessel movement, but certainly we have seen, depending on the weather, certain ships hold offshore. Last weekend though, with that referred to as the bomb cyclone in the media, that significant weather offshore, it was prudent to for my vessel traffic service to fully utilize the anchorages here in Puget Sound, and also encourage and accept vessels doing the racetracks, the Strait of Juan de Fuca, vice holding offshore in 30 to 40 foot seats with 60 to 70 knot winds during Saturday, Sunday on into Monday.
And just one follow-up: did you have to turn away many requests to come in? Were there, or maybe how many vessels were up offshore?
To my knowledge, we did not have to turn away any vessels, and actually, we're working on putting out what we call marine safety information broadcast here, hopefully by tomorrow, just to reinforce with the mariners that are operating these vessels, the carriers, Mike Moore represents, that the anchorages are available. Certainly not preferred to see them all full for a sustained period of time, because open anchorage spots are important for contingency situations, but there is a delicate balance there with measuring risk. Certainly in adverse weather offshore, that's not necessarily the best spot for even these large foreign flag vessels that are trying to make their way into U.S. ports.
Just one other follow up there. We will make it absolutely clear. We'll send out his MSID as soon as he gets it done. We've already communicated to the folks that safety first is paramount, and that the master has to make their decisions. Those ship captains know what the other ship captains are doing. They can see if they're out there, and they can see if they're coming in doing racetracks, whatever. So that whole voyage from Asia to here, they have to make safety decisions about that voyage. And I'm sure your MSIB will just reinforce the need to properly plan and have contingencies for really severe weather and seas. And we'll just continue to push that message out as often as needed. It's always great to just have a Coast Guard message. We just kind of distribute that over and over again. Even if they get it 2 or 3 times, that's fine.
One of the things you were talking about earlier, Captain Moore, was the financial incentive just to get into shore. I think it's $200,000 a day to sit at an anchor. Is that about right?
All I know about it on the cost thing is they want to get to the dock on time. Yes, if you change your speed, it changes fuel consumption. If you're out at anchor, you have to run your emergency. You have to run your generators to provide power to essential systems, and of course to the reefer containers. So they don't want to sit out there doing. They don't want to sit out there doing that. So you have that, and if you're at anchor, then you got to get a launch service to come pick up the pilot, and get another launch service to bring the pilot back out. All those kind of things get involved there, as opposed to coming right into the dock, getting your tugs, getting your pilot, getting your tugs, get it pushed up there and do your cargo operations. So there's cost with not doing that. As you know, there's cost of any of those options. Going to Bellingham, going to Holmes Harbor, even drifting at sea. If you're drifting at sea and you have to light up your engine from time to time just to be safe and get your ship situated right, you're burning fuel out there too, as well as the generators.
This is just one of the reasons why I've just been a little dumbfounded that nobody has taken up the alliance on using the Terminal 46 to get out of the weather and to have a safe place to moor. And I also just want to make sure it's clear that, same with the truckers, that they're highly motivated to move the cans. It wasn't like they're sitting at 9:30. They're only paid per can they move. So they're highly motivated as well. And I think it's partially because the stacks of containers that are there, it's hard to even get to the container that they're supposed to grab. But it's no shortage of motivation. I think the fact is there's no warehouse to put the container.
Right. You have to have somewhere to take it. And there's been some issues with chassis. There's been stories written about driver shortages when the training facilities were turned on and off during COVID. There's a lot of things circulating around the trucking community as well.
Commissioner Fellman, that's an interesting thing you just said, that nobody's taken the Alliance up on the offer of T46. So no ships yet have parked over there?
No, we've had some interest, but then the nibbles have not taken the bait.
Is there a berth for one or two at 46?
Depending on the size of the ship, there is room for two. One is 984 feet, and the other is 1,100 feet. So it's they're not trivial.
Thank you.
Well, one likely candidate there, Commissioner Fellman, is we're looking at vessels that have to reprovision themselves. They've been out for a while. They either got to come in and get some more fuel, 0.1 sulfur fuel, and they've got to get some food and potable water and that kind of thing. So that would be a good fit there, and that's what we're hunting around for to get those kind of folks identified and put them in touch with the Northwest Seaport Alliance.
And just to be clear, we're prepared to significantly reduce, if not waive, the moorage fee, but there would still be cost to bring a tug, bring it to the dock, as well as some line handling. But I can't help but think the cost of running fuel and other expenses is not any bit more than that.
Yep, message received. Northwest Seaport Alliance is here and ready. Hop in and help. We'll get that out there.
In the interest of time, we have time for one last question. Graham, I see you flickering on and off.
Thanks, Melanie. Captain Hilbert, I was hoping you could just really quickly run down, if you know how many vessels we currently have offshore, how many are in the strait, doing the laps, and then have you had any sort of anchor dragging incidents in bad weather, here recently in the Sound?
Good. So I heard a couple different questions. I have my director of vessel traffic service in my office here with me, Mr. Laird Hale, who's a retired Coast Guard captain. You just mentioned him at 6 offshore and 3 in the Straits. And then we continue as part of the watch and the BTS to monitor vessels at anchor and ensuring that they're staying in a safe location. And as a normal part of business, so certainly during periods of heavy weather, vessel anchor draggings can occur.
Excellent. Thank you all so much for joining us today. If there are any follow-up questions, please direct that to my email, mstambaugh@nwseaportalliance.com. That's available on the media advisory as well. And thank you, Captain Hilbert, Captain Moore, our co-chairs, for offering your time and your information for all of us. Thank you all, and have a great rest of your afternoon.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.